This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Warrenville Community Development and Planning Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Monday, September 14th, 2020. In accordance with social distancing requirements, Governor Pritzker's Executive Orders 2020-43 and 2020-44 and Section 7E of the Illinois Opens Meeting Act parentheses, see Public Act 101-0642, end of parentheses. This meeting will be held virtually. Please note this meeting is being recorded. And Deputy Clerk, could I please have the roll call?
Mayor Brummel,
Here.
Alderman Ashour,
Here.
Alderman Berry,
Here.
Alderman Bevere,
Here.
Alderman Davalos,
Here.
Alderman Goodman,
Here.
Alderman Kirchhoff,
Here.
Chairman Widener,
Here.
Alderman Wilson,
Here.
staff, City Administrator Coakley,
Here.
Assistant City Administrator White,
Here.
Community and Economic Development Director Menser,
Here.
Deputy Public Works Director Kukra, Finance Director Dahlstrand, Police Chief Toronto, Senior Civil Engineer Hawking,
Here.
Senior Planner Domavesova,
Here.
City Clerk Larson,
Here.
I know she's here, and I'm here as well. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me for the members that are here and speak along silently if you're at home. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we will now hear any verbal or written comments from the public. Anyone from the public wishing to speak, please announce yourself with your name and address. Please speak slowly and clearly so we can capture your information. Once we have everyone wishing to speak, I will call on you one by one to proceed with your comments. Emailed comments will be read aloud following verbal comments. Do we have any public comments this evening? No? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed with the meeting before, yes. Oh, okay. Do we have anyone who's dialed in or on the phone that would like to make public comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move ahead with officials and staff comments, beginning with Mayor Brummel. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing to add this evening.
Okay, we'll go through the roll call of Alderman Ashour,
Nothing to add tonight, thank you.
Alderman Berry,
I have nothing to add, except I'm having a very difficult time hearing. I could hear before when Christina asked if everyone could hear, and now the volume is very, very low.
Okay, we'll double check and make sure everyone is speaking into the microphones. I hope that will improve things. Alderman Bevere, do you have any comments?
No comments tonight.
Alderman Davalos?
No, I don't have any comments at this time. Thank you.
Alderman Goodman.
I just wanted to express condolences to everyone in California. I have many friends out there who are trying to cope with the very scary wildfires. It's a terrible situation. Many people have died, and I just wanted to express our condolences to everyone who's handling that.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel
No comment. Thank you.
and Alderman Wilson.
No comments.
Okay, thank you. Staff members, beginning with Mr. Coakley.
Thank you. Just some quick comments. I was on a phone call, shared call with other DuPage managers with the DuPage County Health Department this morning. They emphasized, the county health officials emphasized several things. One, DuPage County and our region is now moved into an orange level. We were blue. Orange is not good. Blue is a good color. On the Illinois Department of Public Health County risk metrics map. While there's no state or county planned interventions for our area right now, they reminded all of us to remind everyone in the community to adhere to all the protocols and safety guidelines so that we can get back to a blue level. We don't want to have any restrictions added to our region if we can help it. We have enough already that we're under. Should it go up more, we may be under orders. Some other parts of the state down the Joliet area and Metro East on the Illinois side of the St. Louis area have been under bigger restrictions or more stringent guidelines limiting the number of people in restaurants and businesses. We don't want to be there, so please be cautious. A couple of other things about that. Most of it is younger people, not all of it, but most of it is people under 30 and people under 20 in two different categories there. Possibly start of colleges and schools, and just probably being out and enjoying the end of the summer and have caused some additional spread of the virus. Second thing is they highlighted that there's a business response team. If any businesses have questions about how to do proper cleaning or things in their own business, there is a website link, or you can just contact the DuPage County Health Department and they will be happy to assist you with the information. Thirdly, the city is already getting some questions about Halloween that we're waiting for guidance from the DuPage County Health Department, Illinois Health Department, the CDC, whoever would provide us those guidelines. And we believe that the health department will be doing that very soon. Even Illinois Municipal League has asked, not Halloween per se, but trick-or-treating and what should be the protocols that we should adhere to for all communities, make sure everybody's safe. Thank you.
Thank you. And the Assistant City Administrator White has a comment to make too.
Yes, thank you. We have received some inquiries about the electric supply notifications that have been mailed out to customers whose accounts are eligible for the aggregation program. Wondering if those notices are legitimate or if they're being sent out by sales companies or companies trying to solicit business. The city did renew the program, which is going to be effective in October here. So those electric aggregation notices began going out in August as opt-out notices. In the last couple of weeks, ComEd began sending out letters to any accounts that did not already opt out of the program, letting them know that they've been enrolled in an aggregation program and that their supply for electric would be switched over to Eligo Energy. Residents can still opt out of the program by contacting Eligo at 312-668-9227 during their regular business hours of Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. If residents are not sure about the program or have questions, they can contact the city's consultant, NIMEC, at 312-751-2202 or by email at sderling@nimec.net. All of this information is available on the city's website on the homepage from the Warrenville news section. That's about 2/3 of the way down the homepage of the city's website, which is www.warrenville.il.us.
Thank you very much for that valuable update. Now it's time to begin the business of the meeting. Since we have people waiting on line to do a presentation, we're going to switch the order of the agenda this evening. We're going to move items 5 and 6 to the top of the agenda. So item 5 will be the first item of business that we cover. And then item 6 will be the second order of business. And then we'll follow the agenda from that point forward. So let's move along. The first item then is consideration of homes for a changing region study. And Senior Planner Natalia Domovasova will introduce this agenda item. Natalia, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. The city has this opportunity to participate in the Homes for Changing Regions study. This study would evaluate the existing housing stock as well as currently under construction housing in the area, and also identify key housing issues as well as opportunities that exist in our community. This information, the end result would help, would actually be a resource for the city in developing housing policies and making decisions about future developments as far as the housing. The city would partner with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and I will introduce them in a minute. The team is present tonight. It will bring housing experts and local government practitioners to the table to develop these recommendations that are very specific to the city of Warrenville. As to facilitate this process, the study process effectively, there would have to be a work group created. The work group would basically provide input and feedback on the ideas and recommendations that would be developed during this project. It would primarily consist of community leaders with the diverse housing perspectives. It would include elected and appointed officials, as well as city staff and some active community leaders with the industry knowledge. So with that, I would like to introduce Kyle Smith, who is here with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus tonight, and we'll let them introduce his team and say a little bit about the process and how we go about the study. There's also a backup information that was included with this agenda for tonight. Kyle?
Thank you, and good evening, everybody, and thanks for having us. My name is Kyle Smith. I'm the Housing and Community Development Director with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. And I am here with my team from two partner organizations, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, which is our region's regional planning entity, and the Metropolitan Planning Council, which is a nonprofit think tank in our region. And I'd like to just introduce them really quickly because we are very much a collaborative team, and our three organizations have joined forces on this program. So I'm joined by Nancy Furfer of MPC, Diana Martinez of CMAP, and Enrique Castillo of CMAP. And if you have questions for us, it may be any one of us that are best equipped to answer your questions. So our organizations have partnered for many, many years on a program called Homes for a Changing Region. And the goal of Homes for a Changing Region has been to develop recommendations for balanced housing stock where residents have options in the community throughout their life cycle. We've worked on this for a long time in 40-something communities, including two of your neighbors, most recently Naperville, and also Aurora. The latest iteration of our assistance is a very quick-moving process through 3 meetings using data and stakeholder input to identify 2 to 4 housing issues of importance. And the goal of the assistance is to provide the city with recommendations that are actionable and easily implementable, either because there's grant funding available or because another community has addressed it, or another similar reason. So there's a few critical points about the assistance that we provide, and then I'll talk a little bit about our process and our typical process and how it would interact with the work group that you may consider. I think the the critical things to remember about our process is one, central to kind of our governing philosophy is there's no one size fits all to housing markets or to housing policy. We think that every community has different housing issues, and we've worked in communities that want to increase their quality of their rental stock and see more maintenance in their apartment buildings. We've seen others that want to find ways to expand housing options. And we've worked with others that want to address vacant or distressed properties. So, it's critical with this and this work group that we listen to you, for what those local issues are. We try and match that with data. And then two, as mentioned earlier, we look for realistic options, usually something that a peer municipality has successfully implemented. And then three, we are funded by the state's housing agency, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA. This is why we're free. This is why the assistance is free of charge. The idea is that the IDA has funding programs available for many issues, including vacancy and aging and other things. And so we will, find state funding that may be available through IDA and try and connect you with that. So it's a fast-moving process. We have typically completed our action plans in 4 to 6 months through 3 meetings. First, there is a kickoff needs assessment. We would present a PowerPoint of data of housing needs and issues, and we typically look at seniors, renters, owners, the availability of housing types, recent market activity, and rents and home prices, and identify a few issues from there. We then go to an expert panel where we try and identify the group with 2 to 3 experts on the issues identified. And usually this includes another municipality. And we try and use that dialogue and interject as little as possible to get the best sense of what recommendations may fit in the community. And then finally, we develop an action plan which summarizes the panel and the assessment into a short memo. And as mentioned a couple of times, the focus is really on areas where action can be realistically taken in a short to medium time frame when there's a grant available, a case study from another community, etc. So we are pleased for this possible opportunity to work with all of you in Warrenville. Again, we really are a team, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for the information and introducing us to the other members of your group. I will open it up to questions, beginning with Mayor Brummel.
I have no questions, but this looks like, to me, a great opportunity for the community and something that will be very valuable for us moving ahead. So I'm in favor of participation, and thank you for coming tonight and making your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Davalos? Or I'm sorry, Alderman Ashour.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Alderman Barry?
Thank you. I've read through the material, and it seems like a very interesting process. And I would like to see the city of Warrenville go through that process and see what it is that we are missing. We've tried to expand housing in the last year or so with all the townhouses and the apartments that we're building, but I'm sure we're missing something. I know we've added seniors to our list with the new development, but like I said again, I think we probably are missing something, and it would be nice to know what that is. Thank you.
Alderman Bevere?
I have no questions at this time.
Alderman Davalos?
Thank you. Yes, I just think this is a wonderful opportunity for us, considering the last few years, how active we have all been in some new development around the city and how controversial it has been. And we have walked that process, I think, well, and been open to the public. I think having a study like this done, I think, will be incredibly helpful as we go forward, not only in the development, but in continuing to talk with the public about what their needs are and their reactions. So I'm in favor of the idea. I was impressed with the Naperville report, the one that's in here. My only question to you is, so we aren't exactly a Naperville or an Aurora. So we're a smaller city, and we're different in quite a few ways. So have you done, can you just talk a bit about maybe cities our size that you have dealt with?
Sure. So I'll answer, and if there are others that want to chime in, it's an interesting observation. I picked Naperville and Aurora primarily because they're nearby, but they're actually atypical of the communities that where we've typically worked. We've most commonly worked, I would say, in communities around your size, most of which are non-home rule, a few are. And those include, places like Antioch in northern Lake County, Oak Forest in southern Cook County, Broadview in western Cook County, Harvey in southern Cook County, Beach Park in north central Lake County. I mention all of those places because not only are they smaller size, but they're also very, very different from one another in the housing issues that they're encountering. So we do have a lot of experience both working in smaller sized communities, as well as working in just an array of communities across the region, facing very different things in their markets and very, very different sets of issues that are priorities for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to check to see if any other members of your team, Mr. Smith, have any comments that they would like to add to what you've already told us. Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Enrique with CMAP, and I think we're just really excited for this opportunity. We work around the region, so we are definitely looking forward to partnering up with you all.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Alderman Goodman.
Thank you. I have a few questions. In 2014, some consultants, TESCA and BDI, did a white paper for us as part of our strategic and economic development plan. One of the resources that they included in that report was a capstone project that was put together by some UIC graduate students. So I guess I'm asking how this work product and how this project would compare to those that we've sort of looked at and heard from recently about housing in our community. I know things have changed quite a lot in Warrenville even since the 2014 white paper. I know that this is, research that you would take into consideration and look at as you develop your report, but I'm just wondering how it would compare to the kinds of reports that we got from them and how those sorts of things fit together.
I think it's hard to reply since I haven't seen the particular white paper, but we would and do review all existing studies like that. Particularly if it is elevated as something that should be in consideration as part of the work product. You mentioned TESCA and another consultant?
It was called BDI.
BDI, okay. We have in other communities where we have done work too, we have worked with other consultant groups, and had conversations with them before we've kicked off, and we know both of them, so we would be happy to do that in this case.
Market conditions have changed a lot since then, obviously, and the building in Warrenville was spurred somewhat on the findings in that white paper, which said we had these gaps in our housing availability. But looking through a lot of the recommendations in the report that you sent about Naperville as an example report, it was difficult to see how, and I think Alderman Davalos got at this, but it was difficult to see how any of those suggestions or anything like them would apply to Warrenville. You know, setting aside a massive trust fund or millions of dollars for these sorts of things isn't something I feel like we can contemplate. And setting aside, I guess, a fee as part of new building to be put towards that trust fund, and you know, that seems like poor timing for us right now since we've just had a huge spate of building in the community and it's a little late to do anything like that. So I guess my question is, what kinds of recommendations can we do right after a big surge in building about housing availability? Or does staff think that there's another big surge still out there in the near future?
I would just reply, and I'm curious if the other team members have any comment on this as well. Yeah, I think that a central part of this process is, I'm sorry, if there's a little feedback on my end. I think that a central part of this process is, we don't believe that there is a one size fits all from one community to another. And, I mean, it sounds to me, when we worked with Naperville, they were in a very different kind of position than you are now. They had a very large site, a lot of public dialogue, and they were looking for some policies to maneuver that. We have worked in other communities where the set of issues has been very different. So, for example, seniors was mentioned earlier in senior housing, and also options for seniors to age within their own homes, either through wider availability housing stock and or better, leveraging IDA funding that is out there is a common recommendation. And that's one that I think is something we've talked about in most of the communities that we've worked in. But, I'd say that, the process is really also to identify what those housing issues are. And we never want to present our work as, kind of coming in with recommendations we've presented elsewhere, because there is no one size fits all to this. Housing markets are complex.
Yeah, I would add that, every community has their own pressing issues when they're dealing with housing, and that's some of the things that we look at through the housing analysis. So yeah, once we get in there and start looking at the data, we'll be able to paint the picture of the community there. We will also take into the considerations the previous studies that were done to see if those issues are the same or how they've evolved into whatever it may be. So.
And if I can, I'm sorry, I'm going to introduce myself. My computer I had to leave for a while to get back on because I couldn't hear the conversation, but I'm Nancy Furfer. I'm one of the partners on this project. I'm with the Metropolitan Planning Council. And one of the purpose of the first meeting particularly is to hear from you too, to see what issues you perceive that you have, because oftentimes we will address those issues as well.
Okay, my last question is how much staff time is anticipated as part of this? Because I know it says here that the study would begin upon City Council authorization, so that would be pretty imminent, but I'm a little concerned about the timing. I know that we have the ERP completion going on, and community development staff have repeatedly talked about the recent big building crush and being overwhelmed, so I'm concerned about their current time constraints.
Who from staff would like to answer that? Natalia, you want to speak to that question?
Yes, this is probably a question for staff that'll be addressed. The amount of time, that's a good question. We always estimate, and somewhere in the area around 40, 50 hours it could be. I'm thinking that this is the most of it. But as far as the allocation of staff resources, this is something we've anticipated during the budget year planning last year, about this time of the year, when we were putting it in a work program for the community development department, and this was incorporated with this in mind.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Alderman?
That covers it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Krischel.
Thank you. One quick question, I guess. So I think we can all agree that housing needs and requirements kind of change, and especially more rapidly now than they have probably in the last 20 years. What kind of success criteria do you have as far as, you make recommendations and then we act on those? Is there like a repeat study that you could do to kind of compare and contrast, like, the needs and recommendations that you make, and any actions that we would take based on those recommendations at a further point in the process?
Well, I'm going to start answering, and then I'm going to queue up Nancy for on something specific. We don't have a repeat study per se, but we have been committed to helping individual communities carry through the recommendations. And one example that comes to mind, Nancy, is Antioch, where we have we produced our action plan for them well over a year ago, and have been in regular touch with staff on the on their progress putting together a rental inspection ordinance. I think that part of it, where we are pretty hands-on with implementation, is what sets us apart from, say, a traditional fee-for-service consultant, because we can provide those services as part of the other work that our organization does. Another example, and then Nancy, I'll turn it over to you if you have any others. We also worked with Sauk Village to help a nonprofit in the area successfully apply for funding through IDA to start a program to rehabilitate homes that were in need of rehab. So while those don't directly answer your question for another study, we do try and stay connected, and those are a couple of examples that come to mind.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. We haven't completed that many plans yet, and the recommendations we make, we try to make fairly targeted. And so what we do is afterwards we go back and we work with the community on any recommendations that they really think they want to start right after we're done. Antioch, since it was the one we worked on first, is a perfect example. Besides helping them with some code enforcement issues that they had with some rental property, they had a vacant piece of property that they are looking at, and came back to us and asked for recommendations on how they potential uses for it, which they are now working on, and uses that also are adjacent to their downtown. So it's looking at the broader picture and then helping them think through some of the after we're out of there with the study. We are currently with some other projects that we're working on, working right now in Beach Park. And some of the things that they hadn't thought about, they have a mobile home park that is right off of Sheridan Road, up very far north of Beach Park, is a very northern community in Lake County, and had some issues with the mobile home park. And so recommendations, sometimes it's not directly housing related, but that mobile home park was sort of disconnected to the rest of the community. Suggestions on how they should reconnect it to the community and who they should work with to help them, which entailed sidewalks and CDBG funding and working with Lake County. And we brought Lake County in as one of our expert panelists. so they could have that conversation. So sometimes it's, what are the issues that come up when we talk with you in that first meeting? And then we go back and say, okay, this is something that concerns them. Do we know anybody or what communities do we know that we've worked with or we're familiar with, or Kyle through his connections with communities? Who can we connect them with that has faced an issue such as this? And I don't know if Kyle has said this, but I am a mayor myself of Glenview up north, and did a lot of, I was there when the Glen was redeveloped. And so it's, how do you think through projects like that as well? So it's very tailored to your community, basically. And until we get into, we haven't looked at least I haven't looked at all the demographics and all the things that we do an analysis are. That's why I'm not saying too much about what we would think about for you, but that's what part of the project is. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much for that information. It sounds like it's more than just an assessment is what I'm getting. And so that's
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see this process. So thank you for the information.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson. Alderman Wilson, do you have a comment or question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, my concern was just a little bit about the timing on. I think it's a good process that we might want to take a look at. But we have another report tonight about our staff and the necessity for their operations and what they're going through right now. Oh, it would always be good to get information about what we might be able to do so far as Warrenville is concerned. My only concern is about the timing of it right now, but other than that, that's my only concern.
Thank you. We will take that under consideration. Before I ask for a motion on this topic, I have a couple questions. I just wonder whether or not this study would kind of consider the overall atmosphere of Warrenville when and the way the housing stock plays in to proximity to public gathering places, parks, grocery stores, and other important services that should be provided in the community. Will you look into these matters as well?
So just so I understand the question, would we look at amenities and whether there's a balance of retail and amenities with the housing stock? Is that what I understand?
Access to parks and play spaces and within a good proximity to the housing locations, and that there's not anything like food deserts going on with regard to food service and grocery stores, that type of thing.
I would say that if that is something that's identified as part of the process, that could potentially be part of the focus. Much of the analysis that we would put forward would be focused on the housing stock specifically. But just to give you one example of something that is housing related that we sometimes talk about, we talk about the mismatch between housing and jobs, and the extent to which, those that live in the community, might work in another community, or vice versa. And then that, kind of leads us to broader recommendations as part of the engagement. And so, I wouldn't want to come across like we are putting together a plan on parks or grocery stores, but if it is related to the kind of the conversation we have in those meetings with you, then that could potentially.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion from Anyone, or Natalia, Ms. Domasova, do you have any concluding comments before we request a motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add that there are three requests that the staff is requesting. First is to authorize us to work partner with Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and a team on this project. Second is to create the work group, what we discussed of community leaders that would bounce back the ideas and help the approval this process. And for the work group, we would also like to ask to designate the elected officials, potentially up to 2 representatives would be ideal to participate in such work group.
Thank you. So if there's interest in any of the aldermen participating in this work group, you would like them to mention that now, or you would like them to email you or give you a phone call, or how do you want to carry that through?
Well, that is up to you. This recommendation still goes to the city council, and if you would like to think more about it, let me know, email me, call me. That would be fine.
Well, let's see if anyone has any immediate interest. Any of the aldermen would like to join the task force. Could they speak up now?
Alderman Davalos, I actually would be interested in doing this. This is something I've grown to be very interested in over my time as an alderman. And I think we're in a unique place where we've done so much development in certain areas, and that'll be interesting, that we want to sit back and see what's going on, and yet I think we'd be pushed forward into an interesting place. I just think it would be a wonderful committee to be on. Thanks.
Well, thank you for stepping up. I think you'll be a valuable addition to the committee. Are there any other aldermen that would like to join the task force? If not, we'll give you some time to think about it. If you have an interest, you can email or call Ms. Domovasova and express your interest. And we'll reach out to aldermen if we don't hear of a second alderman stepping up to join the task force. So we'll be assured to get full participation from the council. And then the work group, Ms. Domovasova, you see that being done in the same manner, where if people have ideas for participants who would be valuable to join the work group, that they could send you a list of those names and those individuals who you may want to recruit for that?
Yes, that would be a wonderful idea. If you know of any active community members that one way or the other connected to housing, or either experts in the industry or users or homeowners association, oftentimes deal with a lot of, not deal, but know, aware of what is happening in the community, real estate agents that are active in the community. I would definitely welcome any recommendations for me to reach out to these people.
If I can, we will provide you with a list of the types of people too you might think about adding to that group, that might represent your community, as well as you might think of putting 1 or 2 appointed officials on, if you have like somebody from a planning commission or zoning board, whatever commissions you have that you think might help the process as well, because a lot of these issues will come to them sometimes before it comes to you.
Right, and that's a great suggestion. I believe we have a couple volunteers from the Plan Commission already. They're just waiting for the City Council. Okay.
Okay, well, it sounds like we're moving along on this topic, all we're lacking is a motion, and then we can move into full gear and start developing the recommendations of, along with the consultants of who might be on the work group and what other additional city representatives may join in. So does anyone care to make a motion?
Alderman Goodman, I'll make the motion. I make a motion to recommend to the City Council that we authorize the city staff to partner with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and the Metropolitan Planning Council on a Warrenville-specific Homes for Changing Regions study. Also, that we authorize city staff to create a work group to provide input and review these study-related materials. And also that we designate 2 representatives from the elected body, either the mayor and/or city council members, to participate in the work group.
Alderman Davilo, second.
We have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk, would you like to take the roll call?
Alderman Berry?
Alderman Berry, we couldn't hear you.
Aye.
Thank you.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Chrisell?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Abshauer?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Could you repeat that?
I said the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Well, great. Thank you for your participation and introducing us to your group. And we look forward to moving forward with this subject. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move along now to the second item on the agenda, consideration of the matrix report on city services and staffing needs. And City Administrator John Coakley will introduce this topic for discussion.
Thank you. I'll make a few comments and then turn it over to the consultant, Alan, to present the study report. Just quickly to remind everyone, it's been a while. During the summer of 2019, the council, we did a RFQ, request for proposals and qualifications. City Council approved an agreement in August of 2019 with Matrix Consulting for a study that it was to look at the services that are provided by the city, the type, quality, and kind, basically. Get input from employees, from elected officials, from other governmental overlapping districts, and from our citizens and businesses in the community to find out what it is that they really wanted us to be doing. And then as part of that study to look at the staffing and operational issues of what we would need to do to make sure that any new services could be handled, and are we right size now? Do we need more staffing? Do we need more in the future? That sort of thing. The study was actually done in September and October of 2019. And then excuse me, I think I have a Zoom allergies because every time I'm speaking on camera, I suddenly have a cough. Excuse me, if that's a thing. Anyway, and the initial draft was sent to me in December of 2019. There were a number of things back and forth between the consultant and our staff, many times on just looking for additional information, making more robust the service discussion that was involved from the focus groups and the community members, as well as just some things to clarify. The format and content is from Matrix, but there was a number of different things just to clarify and do some fact checking. Unfortunately, also the pandemic just got in the way of, well, everything. Did delay us by several months. So this is much further delay than I'll even speak for the Matrix folks than any of us anticipated. I will add a note though, ironically, in hindsight, it is probably a benefit that this has been delayed, because had we gotten the information and the council accepted the final report perhaps in December or January of this year, and we began to move towards putting these things into the budget, The pandemic was going to be hitting unknown to us at that point, and the economy was going to have some major impacts. And I will just guarantee everything that we would have been looking to move ahead on and spent extra time on at that point would have been put on hold, undoubtedly. So it's probably a good time to be assessing this. I don't believe that the service requests and needs and interests have changed in the community. Our resources have to an extent, so they may delay the impacts based on or the outcomes, but we will get to that point. Process going on, I'll let Alan speak in a minute, I promise, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and comments. But the process would be to have him present the report. We can answer all the questions that you have tonight. Then we're asking for the council to eventually have a recommendation from the committee to the council to accept the report, and then direct staff to start working towards some implementation plans, whether it be in the next year's budget or going forward. This isn't a one-time quickly adopt plan. This is a long-term, as you'll see in the recommendations, that goes out for several years. If there are specifics, I would suggest that if there's specifics about how to implement them or really want to drill down more things that are internal rather than involving matrix, he's here, so I'm sure he'll answer all the questions for as long as you have them. But there may be things we want to put on future council or committee agendas that we can discuss that are more internal and might not require their attention. So with that kind of thinking and overview, I'll turn it over to Alan Pennington, who is the matrix consulting person who headed up this study, and let him go with the report, and then we'll answer questions.
Okay, thank you, John. And thank you for having us at your meeting tonight and moving us up. I wasn't anticipating that, so it's very appreciated. We do have a quick PowerPoint. We thought it would be useful to maybe take 5 to 10 minutes at maximum just to give you a quick overview. I know you've had the report and probably have read through it, but sort of to put this in a little bit of context and highlight some of the key issues. So I'm going to try to share my screen here with you and make sure everyone can see it. Okay, great. Hopefully you can see that now. So as you heard, the study was principally focused on conducting an evaluation of the services, the service levels, and the staffing needs for the city of Warrenville. And we used a variety of methodologies as we went through the project. That included a significant number of staff interviews, collection of data regarding the current city services and staffing metrics that are in place and staffing allocations. I didn't put it on here, but for those of you who were on the council, we did alderman interviews individually with you. We had 6 community meetings, and I believe there are around 61 participants at those various meetings. We did some comparative services and staffing benchmarking with other communities to get a sense of where you fell in that range. And then we conducted an operational and staffing utilization analysis and developed the recommendations. I think to put the overall study into context, there's a few key findings that we wanted to highlight. Our observation is that the city has a service delivery approach that is highly customer oriented and responsive, and that's a real strength of the organization. And you may have noted in the report, we also noted it as one of the challenges, perhaps too responsive and too customer oriented at times. The city's historically operated with very lean staffing allocations and a high level of cross utilization and cross training of staff, and it served you very well, very conservative approach to staffing. But it has created some challenges that we identified in the report and the need for some additional staffing moving forward. I would say you're really at the point where you can no longer do more with existing resources. While staff will do their best and try hard to accommodate you, what you'll find is things will take longer to get done, and the work that was planned to be done doesn't get done. It was great to hear the comment earlier when you were talking about another study is what's the staff impact? Because I think that's really the critical question that kept coming up is there's only so much we can do. And so I think you'll notice that throughout the report. We think there's going to be some great opportunities to further automate and improve internal efficiencies and effectiveness as you complete the ERP implementation. The full impact of those obviously won't be known until that's completed, but it's clearly going to have some improvements for you. And staff generally very well trained and dedicated to the provision of a high level of service to the residents. So I'm going to just go very quickly department by department, and you'll notice in the report, in the table of recommendations and the staffing recommendations, we show not only the increase in full-time staff, but part-time or seasonal, as well as some indication of a best estimate over the next 5 years when they are would be needed. And obviously this was based upon the work we were doing at the time. There may be some modifications due to COVID. It may push things out a little bit, but I think generally the relative priority should stay in place. Obviously, if economic development activities were to slow down, that could impact some of those recommendations. And the priority we assigned to these is really based upon how critical we felt it was to address an operational issue or a service level issue that was identified, and or a workload issue, but also based upon the feedback we heard, whether it was from staff interviews, alderman interviews, or the public interviews. There were some issues that came up quite frequently, and we gave those greater priority because of the prominence of them. So within city administration, we have a recommendation here to consider modifying public access to the Manning Avenue as a main access point. That's really to put all public interaction at one counter so that other staff can focus on assigned duties and delay somewhat the need for additional resources. Communications coordinator in fiscal year 21, part-time clerical position in 2022, an intern program starting in fiscal year 2023, which coincides with a recommendation we have for implementing a performance measurement program that would allow you to track key metrics for each department to measure service delivery and performance of them. Within community development, there are on this slide 2 critical issues. One is a planner and economic development coordinator, and that would be a planner to focus on more long-range planning rather than the current planning and development applications, and additional resources in the economic development area. We're proposing that to be a cross-trained hybrid type position in fiscal year 2022. One of the service enhancements that we did recommend in here is the consideration of a rental registration program, and that would include enhanced proactive enforcement. And that would require the addition of, our estimate is 1 full-time dedicated code enforcement officer position. And that would be a dedicated code enforcement officer position, not the hybrid that you use now with inspectors, building inspectors, code property maintenance. That position is tied in our report to the implementation of that rental registration program. And we believe there would be some revenue off to help offset a significant portion of that salary. Within finance, we've recommended a reclassification of a position to create an assistant finance director in fiscal year 2023, as well as a part-time accountant position that's tied to that reclassification. There's a need for greater succession planning, expanding the duties that can be done by more than one individual, and we did not feel that it's possible to do that with existing resources. Within police, we have 3 key recommendations. One is to reduce the hours for the records office by discontinuing Saturday hours, so a service reduction. That would allow you to reduce staffing by 1 position in 2020, if you were to do it at that point, as well as the implementation of an administrative sergeant position in fiscal year 2021. The majority of the recommendations, by number at least, if not prominence or priority, fall within the public works area. We have recommended that you continue the focus on transitioning the deputy director to a full director position, reorganizing the department into 2 divisions rather than the existing 4, look at options to contract out fleet maintenance as relatively high priority focus. There have been some historical difficulties in filling the mechanic position. We feel that because of that and other reasons that it makes sense to take a look at contracting that out entirely. The new positions being added include a sewer worker and a street worker. We've recommended fiscal year 2021 or as soon as feasible. And then based upon projected growth and other workload increases, there's a need for an additional water worker and a street worker in fiscal year 2025. As I mentioned earlier, we sort of targeted these over a 5-year time horizon. And in the report, we have a summary table that shows each year what those changes would be. So that's a real high level overview. I thought it would be beneficial if we gave you that and then really focused in and answered questions about specific areas that you would specifically like to talk about.
Well, thank you very much for the informative report. And we'll begin with question and comments, beginning with Mayor Brummel.
Thank you. A lot of thoughtful suggestions, and clearly you took a very good look at what we're doing and how we accomplish what we're doing. Of course, the big concern that I have, and I'm sure the other elected officials, is how we fund all these changes. There are several additions, and staff, of course, is the most expensive element that we have in our whole operation. So I'm excited at the possibilities. I suspect that the time frame may be elongated somewhat to accomplishing some of these things, just because of the fact that revenues are down and we're not sure how long that depression will last before we can get to a position of strength again to look at these things. But it's certainly very helpful to have these suggestions made from the outside, someone who knows what they're looking at, look at our operation, and give us some critical suggestions on how to improve it. So I'm excited at the prospect that you've given us for the next few years, and I'm hopeful that things will turn around so that we're able to implement some of the things that you've suggested. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Ashour.
The study's actually very interesting. It'll make a good guideline. It'll be something that probably is brought to us by staff during the budget process as we get out of this mess. But it's good guidelines, and like the mayor said, I think this is going to be stretched out quite a bit compared to what was in the report. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Alderman Berry.
Yes, I also feel that some of these dates are, we're definitely not going to be able to meet due to the budgeting issues that we have for this year and possibly for next year. So, but I do like the report. I like that the Matrix Consulting Group has listened to everyone, and I know it's taken a while to get the report done, but I think it's very helpful for us to realize that the staff that we do have is overwhelmed, and sometimes they just can't get the things done when we need them to get them done. And I know that we are going to have to really take full consideration of the recommendations that the Matrix people have given us. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere.
Yeah, other two aldermen hit a lot of spots that I was thinking of, and just I feel the same way. Things could take a little longer, and thanks for the report, and just got to keep an eye on everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos.
Yes, thank you. I also agree with the people that have previously spoken. I was glad to see, I mean, overall, this is a plan for growth. And we will, well, right now we're a little bit under the gun, but there will be growth. We have a lot of development that's happening, and apartments that are being occupied, and all kinds of things are going on. So ultimately, that's property taxes, and ultimately these things may be possible. It'll be interesting as we talk about this. I think it's great to have the suggestions, and then we can put them higher priority, lower, but it's great to have the skeleton structure of a really good idea, and that in the end focuses on growth. So I'm happy about that. On a side note, closing the Manning Avenue entrance, I'll have a few things to say about that. I would hope it wouldn't be always. I would hope that council meetings would be open and aldermen and people with a keypad could still get in there, because it is the front of the building. So people are going to try to go there. So I'm open to compromise, but I don't know if I would like it totally closed. So anyway, thank you very much for all this work. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Thank you. Yeah, as usual, Alderman Davalos anticipates some of my own thoughts. The entrance closing was one of the main things that leaped out at me as well. And I think that if that sort of thing is implemented, it's going to have to be a pretty well thought out conversation before we change that particular policy, because certainly public access to the building for meetings, for city council events is usually through that door. So if there's just I don't know, closing the door toward the staff area and having a sign that says staff only, if that's, I mean, I don't know exactly what you're envisioning, but if the idea is that there's no desk here and there's just better signage directing people downstairs, if the door itself is locked, I mean, I'm not sure what you're envisioning for that particular recommendation, but certainly a parking situation, the large parking lot out in the front of this building and a few spaces along the back and a lot where mostly the staff parks in the back isn't conducive to having all of the public access to the other side of the building. So there are details we would definitely need to consider before implementing that. My main question for you, Mr. Pennington, has to do with the dates in your recommendations. I know a couple of people have already commented that they think we're going to have to push this back because of COVID and economic conditions. But I wonder if maybe, based on your recommendation to start doing some things in fiscal year 2020 and the fact that our fiscal year 2020 ended several months ago, I wonder if perhaps all the dates here are off by a year. If the understanding of our fiscal years, we're in fiscal year 2021 now.
Right.
And that will end in the spring. So,
Yeah, so I think, I was trying to get to the one table. We did try to adjust that. They are really a relative priority. So for example, if we were to push everything back, we tried to prioritize them based upon those that would have the greatest impact or would address the biggest need. So for example, communication, I think was a really high issue. So if you say, hey, we can't do that in the time frame you've put, but it's still important, then that would be, I think the greater priority to be addressed. But I'll double check that table that has I was trying to find the page number for you, that had them by the 5-year category.
okay, I mean, I guess it's not that important. If we think about these as a ranked list of priorities, this one first, then this one, that might be more useful than looking at these specific fiscal year designations in the key recommendations list in your slide. My only other question, let's see, on page 20 of your report, you talk about the code enforcement and then go on page 21 to talk about the chief code official, building inspector, and so on.
Right.
There's an item on our agenda tonight. I don't know if you've looked at it yet, but I wonder how the recommendation that we're considering tonight about trying to advertise for that exact position fits in with what you're recommending here. We're having an upcoming retirement, so we're trying to hire for a staff position for a vacancy that we know is coming, but the recommendation tonight basically turns that position into kind of a position and a half, which isn't something I think is contemplated in your recommendations. I wonder how you think that fits in with our staffing needs.
Sure. Without having talked to staff about this, and I did read the agenda item, I think the big picture, it aligns really well. Because one of the things we recommended is having a dedicated property maintenance staff member rather than using the cross-trained building inspector code enforcement position. I think staff, I greatly summarized and highlighted the issues with that. People who are building inspectors typically don't want to do property maintenance, and people in property maintenance often don't have the background to jump into the building inspector. So I think it better positions you to find the right person for those jobs. It provides greater opportunities for internal growth potentially in the future. I think because current workload, you're going to deal with building permits, building inspections. Those are always going to take priority over property maintenance inspections unless it's a life safety or critical issue. So dedicated resources will allow you to put the focus where it needs to be, that enhance property maintenance. So I think the big picture is it's right in alignment. If you're not able to fill the building inspector, that's obviously a critical function. We have noted that, you know, in that department especially, there really wasn't any additional capacity. So if growth takes off again or continues on the upward trajectory, I think we had a recommendation in there about, you know, continuing to monitor that, because there's only so much you can do. You've had the relief valve in the past of the contractual services that you can use to help the peaks and valleys. But clearly, I think you can do it more effectively, cost effectively, if you have full and part-time staff on your staff to do that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel.
Thank you. No questions. I think just two quick comments. I thought it was interesting that the main point on the key findings, the very first one was the service delivery approach is highly customer oriented and responsive. I think I would agree with that 100%. And it's good to see that someone on the outside can gather that from the study as well. That's pretty impressive. The other thing is that a lot of these recommendations, I think it's interesting that we've kind of come to these conclusions ourselves as well. So it's good that we're kind of reinforcing that with a professional engagement like that. So, you know, 60 plus pages of very detailed information. So thank you very much for the report. It's a lot of great information. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
Yeah, my first comment is this is one of the best reports I've seen from anybody for a while. It really goes into details, hits the nail on the head, and there are an awful lot of good observations there that I agree with. And I think that when we go into the budget session for next year, a lot of these things are going to have priorities, and it's going to be tough decisions to make. But I think it was a very, very good report, and I look forward to the opportunity to make some changes that we will have to make and expect those changes to be successful. We're still working with that ERP program. Once it gets done, a lot of other things may fall into place a little easier, time-wise, dollar-wise. So thank you very much for that report. I think it's extremely good.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. And I don't think I have anything to add. I think the aldermen have, you know, covered all the areas, and we certainly appreciate you pulling together this excellent report, and it will offer a great guideline and just help us to establish priorities as we move forward with our workforce. I would ask that someone now make a motion to approve this.
Robert Wills, I'll make a motion to recommend the City Council accept the Matrix Consulting Group's analysis of the city's services and impacts on staffing needs report dated August 26, 2020, and direct city staff to consider the recommendations when preparing annual city budgets.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, would you please call the roll? Or the vote?
Alderman Chrisell,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Ashaw,
Aye.
motion carries.
City Administrator has a comment.
Thank you. I realized one of my opening comments, I'm remiss in not thanking all the people, and I'll just do it quickly. But all of the staff at the city for a lot of reviews, all our department heads, Christina for helping keep me on track to keep this on track. There's a lot of time. Alan probably got very tired of hearing from us. His email box was probably full too many times. But an enormous amount of input from all of our staff who did a great job. Dawn wasn't here for the start of this, but she did a quick review of the end to make sure we had things that we were giving them back that made sense. And it was a huge team effort, and it was really appreciated because it's, I think everyone will agree, it's a better result that works for us just based on the formatting and forum and details. So thank you very much from everybody that assisted with this.
Absolutely.
And thank you for overseeing the whole process. Our next agenda item is a consideration of a liability transfer agreement with Phillips 66 Company for the Old Town Development Site. And I will introduce Community and Economic Development Director Menser, who will speak to this item. Director Menser.
Thank you, Chairman. And I will confess that reverberation was when I turned my mic, the wrong mic on. I'm still getting used to all the buttons and the correct setup. Thankfully, we have Christine to make sure that all happens properly. So you probably recall that as the city worked through the due diligence process and decision process that ultimately led to the city's acquisition of the former Citgo property, we acknowledged and talked about the existing leaking underground storage tank incident that is open on the property, dates back to 1997, and it's the responsibility of Phillips 66 to close that leaking underground storage tank incident. As we work through the due diligence and acquisition property process, we, from a staff perspective, consultant and attorney perspective, concluded that really, if the city is going to get to a positive end result here, that we need to take control of the old lust incident and make sure that that gets closed out in a timely manner and to a level that would be consistent with how the city would like the property to be ultimately used, rather than how Phillips 66 had intended to close it out, which was to a lesser standard than what the city's plan is currently. So ultimately, the staff recommended during that process back in July that we negotiate a liability transfer agreement with Phillips 66 that would essentially allow the city to, well, require, allow, depending on your perspective, assume responsibility for closing out the old lust incident, and in exchange, Phillips 66 Corporation would compensate the city. Through the negotiations, we've developed the final draft liability and transfer agreement that is included in your agenda packet backup. I would say, from my perspective, the terms and language within that agreement, the main terms and language are consistent with what was presented during the decision process to acquire the property. And it really does 3 or 4 main things from my perspective. I'll summarize as follows. It definitely does give the city control over the timing of closing out this leaking underground storage tank. The last thing we would want to do is to now own the property, do everything we need to do for the issues that we currently are responsible for, only to have Phillips 66 not be forced by the state to finalize taking care of this 1997 lust incident. Which could put us in a difficult position as we try to actually sell off parts of the property or use parts of the property for park purposes. So we would have direct control and no one to slow us down other than, you know, whatever the process is with the state to get that closed out properly. If we're in control, we can make sure that we close it out to residential standards, which are the standards that would be necessary to allow for a public open space use on the portion of the property rather than the commercial industrial standards that Phillips 66 had previously proposed and received tentative approval from the IPA to close it out to. As I mentioned, there is some financial compensation that Phillips 66 would provide to the city to take on the responsibilities associated with closing out the old Lust incident. The final agreement requires that Phillips 66 pay the city $90,000 for that work and to assume certain responsibilities to implement that work. And then finally, last but not least, part of the deal, you might say, is that Phillips 66 would essentially receive certain commitments from the city under the agreement and would receive some, I'll call it from kind of a layman's term standpoint, some liability insurance from the city, some protections against claims and that individuals might submit based on the contamination that Phillips 66 is responsible for in the ground. The important part from my perspective on the indemnification or liability insurance that we would provide in the agreement is that it's specifically limited to or it does not include, that's probably the better way to put it, the liability insurance type protections we would provide to Phillips 66 don't extend to and include any contamination that may have migrated off-site as a result of Phillips 66 problems on the property. So we would indemnify and hold Phillips 66 harmless for all the contamination on the site that we will be dealing with. But if there are off-site issues because of their contamination and somebody decides to sue for damages, Phillips 66 is not going to receive any liability insurance, and we're not going to defend and hold them harmless in that situation. I think that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think this is a necessary and appropriate next step for the city. I guess I did want to just share my opinion that we will be receiving $90,000 if this agreement is approved from Phillips 66 to cover the costs associated with all the things that we need to do to close out that Lust incident. During our due diligence process, we spent a significant amount of time analyzing all of the old data for the existing Lust, the old Lust incident. We collected a bunch of new data on the contamination on the property. We had extensive conversations with different representatives down at the Illinois EPA, including the project manager that is assigned and has been assigned to the old Lust incident. And we fully understand, I can tell you, that what is necessary to close out the old Lust incident and the cost, estimated cost for the city to close out that old Lust incident when we deal with the new Lust incident that will be triggered when we take out the existing tanks on the property is estimated to be, you know, $10,000 or $20,000, no more than $20,000. And it's important to note that about 80% of that $20,000 is actually reimbursable under the state's Lust program. Under the Lust program, the state has allocated about $1.5 million to this property for Lust-related remediation efforts on the site. We don't anticipate that the ultimate costs will be anywhere near that, but there is substantial funding at the state level that has been allocated to cover the costs that we will incur and would further reduce or further increase the value to the city of the $90,000 that Phillips 66 would be paying us.
Thank you, Director Menser. We'll begin with questions and comments with the mayor, Mayor Brummel.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As usual, Ron, a solid proposal to move us forward on this project. I appreciate the time and effort that has gone into bringing it to us tonight, and I fully support the staff recommendation. So thanks again.
Alderman Ashour.
No comment. Excellent report.
Thank you. Alderman Barry.
Yes, the report is good. I like the outcome. I like that Phillips 66 will be responsible, and hopefully they will pay us and get them off the hook for the contamination. And then hopefully we can go forward then and get this property suited for whatever we plan for in the future.
Thank you. Alderman Devere.
No comment.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos.
Yeah, so this is a proposal we're going to give to Phillips 66. They have not okayed this yet. This is just what our proposal will be, correct?
No, this is an agreement that we started negotiating the kind of the key elements of during the city's due diligence process, because we knew that dealing with this particular issue was going to be important in the overall outcome and decision that the city was going to have regarding the purchase of the property. And we had come to some tentative non-binding agreement during that process on a set of terms that seemed to make sense from both sides. At that time, we hadn't yet agreed on the level of compensation that and some of the details of the indemnification language that was going to be incorporated into the agreement. But since July, we spent a considerable amount of time and back and forth with Phillips 66 and their legal representation to get this agreement finalized in the form that it's not finalized, it's a final draft that's included in the agenda backup materials. So it's our understanding that if the city council does approve this, that Phillips 66 will execute it as it's been presented this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Thank you. I appreciate Ron's position on this issue. He and I have had some conversations, and I understand why, now that the city is saddled with a piece of very contaminated property, staff is concerned about having control over all of the cleanup efforts. When we bought this property, quite a lot of discussion was had, and city council members mentioned their relief that the old lust incident, the pollution that was already there, was clearly defined, and that the responsibility for it was assigned to somebody else, and that we wouldn't be taking on that responsibility when we bought the property. So the idea of this agreement, just the general principle of it, that we're now taking on that very specific liability, isn't something that I'm super comfortable with. It's not something that I think meets everybody's intentions with regard to this property initially. But I've heard what Ron has to say about what he thinks the costs will be. He feels we've done enough due diligence to be comfortable that we're being paid more than it's going to cost us. He's also quite comfortable that the reimbursable part of the cleanup will be paid by the state. We've had past experience with this almost exact situation, buying a brownfield site, doing cleanup that we expected to be reimbursed by the state, and that didn't go as planned. Those expenses were quite a lot higher than $90,000. Those expenses were quite a lot of them were expected to be reimbursed by the state. And as you're, I believe, all aware, we never got that reimbursement. So I remain concerned. I understand staff's position. I understand the details of this legal agreement. I think that the language in the staff memo asserting that Phillips 66 remains responsible for cleanup on properties outside the legal limits of the property that we bought. I think that phrasing is overstated because in this liability transfer agreement, the city takes responsibility for pursuing cleanup, including ELUX on properties outside that the pollution has mitigated to. So I'm just generally concerned. I guess that's my only comment. That's all I have.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel.
Yeah, so if this agreement was not approved by Phillips 66, what would the end result be then? So then we would be waiting on them to close out that Lust incident, correct?
Technically you don't have to close out the Lust incident, but it's a major cloud on the property that any future end users would be very concerned about and likely cautious to move forward with any substantial investment in. I mean, ultimately they have to if they're going to develop and use it for some private use, that's going to mean they're going to either sell it after they develop it to end users, or they're going to rent it to end users. And if there's some concern over whether or not there's contamination on the property that hasn't been properly dealt with or closed out, it's a big cloud and could impact what the city wants to accomplish with the property. So it's definitely is something that, from my perspective, we want to take care of, and we don't want to have that cloud hanging out there. But there's no legal requirement that we deal with it.
Okay, no, that answers the question. And I agree that it's something that we would want to have taken care of, and waiting for the previous owners to do this, I don't think would happen in a timely manner, if at all. So I support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
No, I too. I think it's time, and I'm grateful for all the work that's been put into this to get us to the point where we have to rely on Phillips 66 doing their end of it, but there's nothing we can do about that until we at least do our part. So I'm in favor of it and moving forward to it now.
Thank you. Unless there's any other questions or comments, I would appreciate having a motion on this issue.
I would recommend the City Council approve the September 9th, 2020 liability transfer agreement with Phillips 66.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, would you please take the vote tally?
Alderman Ashaw?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Krischel?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Menser, for carrying this through, developing all the research, and putting the city in a good position to move forward on this project. The next item on our agenda is consideration of staff recommendations regarding status of open building inspector code enforcement officer position. And again, the community and economic development director, Menser, will handle this item.
You'll probably recall that during the budget preparation process, staff made a recommendation to create a new full-time combined building inspector code enforcement officer position, and the city council authorized us before the actual budget, this year's budget was approved, to begin recruitment for that particular position. And really, there's three main reasons why we felt we needed to move forward with that position. Back in late winter, we knew that there was going to be some employee retirements in the code enforcement building division in the foreseeable future. We didn't know exactly when, but we thought it would be appropriate to put the pieces in place so that we would have an effective transition and of that succession of the current building inspector, code enforcement officer. We also knew that and expected that there was going to be an extremely high amount of building permit activity occurring in the community this construction season based on all the approvals that have been put in place by the city over the last couple of years. And then finally, we had been dealing with code enforcement on a very reactionary basis. The prior summer, we had used an outside consulting firm that was relatively effective, but still they were an outside consulting firm that didn't know the community, and they were quite expensive, relative speaking anyway. So the council approved that. We began recruitment processes about the same time it started to become more clear on the severity of COVID and the pandemic that we're all now dealing with. That the pandemic has certainly had an impact on our ability to recruit. We kind of paused to kind of see what was going to happen if construction activity was going to be an essential activity and continue, what was going to happen with the economy. We kind of reinitiated the recruitment process sometime in June. We interviewed 7 different candidates, the 7 best candidates that we received applications from. 2 of those we had second interviews with. Ultimately, we determined that none of those people really fit what we needed. We really need to have an experienced municipal building inspector that would fit the kind of the personality and character of the city of Warrenville. And unfortunately, none of the folks that we interviewed really were, at least in my perspective, a good, perfect fit. So we did not fill that position. A couple of reasons, at least as I've gone back and thought about it, for maybe not attracting the best candidates is there's still a lot of construction activity occurring in the Chicago metropolitan area, DuPage County area. So what that means is that there's not a whole lot of, construction activity is an essential activity and was allowed to continue under the restrictions that the governor's put in place. And it's, you look around, there's a lot of construction going on. So there's not really a whole lot of folks in the private sector that are thinking about changing careers and moving to the public sector. But probably more importantly, upon reflection, I think that's a real drawback when you're trying to hire an experienced building inspector to ask or request, expect them to perform property maintenance code enforcement activities. It's just property maintenance, for better or for worse, is a real tough job. From a municipal perspective, it's probably one of the least appreciated and most difficult jobs to deal with on a day in, day out basis. And if you have a seasoned building inspector, they probably did property maintenance at some point in their career, but have graduated, you might say, and transitioned as they've gotten more experience to not have to be required to do that. So that brings us to where we're at today. We believe that in order to meet our most pressing and important need, that of getting a full-time building inspector position in-house before our current building inspector retires, which he has indicated that will be just about the end of this year now. So we have a pretty clear understanding when that person's going to be leaving employment with the city of Warrenville. We need to get somebody that's qualified to replace him, and the sooner we can make that happen, the better. So what we are recommending as it relates to that particular issue is to refocus the job description, position description for that, what we've been looking for, to focus entirely on building inspection responsibilities and not make the position a joint position that would also be responsible for code enforcement activities. We feel that there's certainly enough building activity that's occurring in the community today, and unless something really dramatic happens, will continue to be occurring in the community next construction season. to justify a full-time position. And at the same time, we're recommending that we develop a part-time code enforcement officer position that would allow us to bring somebody in on ideally on a part-time basis to deal with code enforcement work that's necessary. That's a little bit of a lesser need at this point in time, but it is still something that would be appropriate to see to test. In my mind, I put it in the, I think in the memo, to kind of test the market to see who might be out there that would be interested in working for a municipality on a part-time basis. Could be a retired building inspector or a retired police officer that might be interested in doing that type of work. So that's the two recommendations. That's different than what we had presented to the city council in the spring or late winter spring of this year. I kind of see the part-time code enforcement officer recommendation is kind of something that we're going to need to reevaluate as part of the budget process. The consultant tonight spoke to that whole issue of dealing with code enforcement long-term. Part of the ongoing budget process discussions typically over the last few years anyway have involved whether the city is going to move forward with a rental registration and inspection program. And if we do, that part-time position would need to be expanded and elevated to most likely be a full-time position. If construction activity changes dramatically for the better, we might need to have some additional building inspection assistance. If it changes for the worst, the new building inspector that we do hire that remain a full-time employee might be forced to accept some additional responsibilities that they might not otherwise have wanted initially, just because of the way things play out. And we won't know that. I mean, we will know more in December and January as we're working through the budget process than we know today. But I think what I'm proposing, at least from my perspective, is a conservative approach, and is essentially just replacing the existing building inspector when he retires in late December, early January, with a new full-time inspector, and then transitioning away from the use of outside consultants for code enforcement activities and using part-time inspectors in lieu.
Well, thank you for your in-depth report and analysis. We'll go ahead with comments and questions, beginning with Mayor Brummel.
Thank you, and thank you, Ron. I guess I had never really considered the dichotomy that this points up, that the building inspectors probably have a totally different set of requirements and talents as opposed to code enforcement officers, and mixing those two things together might not be such a good idea. It looks to me like this is a thoughtful way to look for a quality person going forward. Again, a building inspector probably is a little higher in the pecking order of these types of positions. We might be in a better chance to find somebody of quality who might be interested in that, because they're not going to be saddled with the code enforcement part of it. So thanks for thinking this through. It makes sense to me. And let's hope going forward that we're able to find somebody again before our good people that are retiring actually retire, so that we can have a solid transition. So thanks.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour.
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Barry.
Yes, I like that this falls right in line with the recommendations from the matrix group, and I do like the separation of both of those positions. Hopefully we will be able to get a very good building inspector, because with all the things that are going on, we really do need one, and get him into that or him or her into that position as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere.
No comment. Ron answered everything real good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Davalos.
No comment at this point, really. Except if we can't find the second position to just do code enforcement of property, then I guess we just use a consultant for a while until that person can be hired, right? Or
That
somebody
would,
else on staff?
that would be our plan. We, continue, or we are currently using an outside vendor, and we would
Right.
continue to use them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Yes, I certainly appreciated the feedback from the consultant and how this fits into the staffing study. It really makes me contemplate how this is the third time I can think of in recent years, and I certainly might be missing things, where a staff member who was going was so valuable to our city and so irreplaceable that it took 1.5 or 2 people to replace them. I'm thinking of Joyce and Mike. So congratulations to our fabulous staff for being irreplaceable and for wearing so many hats and doing so much that it takes more than one person to fill their shoes when they go. However, I am very concerned about our financial capabilities going forward to add more than one staff member. I agree with Ron that we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out once we have the budget in front of us. It's very difficult to talk about adding a nebulous staff member right now without all the different costs and benefits in front of us and without a better grip on the total overall impacts of COVID to our city budget. So I'm in favor of the recommendation. I think it's perfectly reasonable if we can afford it. I don't know if we can, and we'll have to make that determination at a different time.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel.
No questions, thanks.
And Alderman Wilson.
Just the comment that Matrix report had this in it, and it was very important to them and something that we needed to take care of. And again, we know someone's going to be leaving, so we have to continue to be proactive in getting their replacements and not, we've done in the past, fall short of having somebody to take over. So I'm all in favor of it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. And now, if someone would like to make a motion, we can move this forward.
I would make a recommendation to City Council authorize staff to implement the building inspector and code enforcement officer staffing recommendations outlined in Community and Economic Development Director September the 9th, 2020 memo.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, would you care to take a vote tally, please?
1 second here. Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Krischel?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Ashour?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is consideration of public information and input meeting for potential Warrenville Grove Trail Connection project. Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will provide us with all we need to know about this topic. Christine?
Thank you, Chairman. As you all may or may not know, the Warrenville Grove Trail Connection is located on the proposed trail connection is located on the west side of the West Branch DuPage River between the Warrenville Grove and the Illinois Prairie Path. The proposed path is located on Forest Preserve District property. It was identified in the city's Old Town Civic Center sub-area plan as a high priority trail path project, and it was also identified in the city's bikeway implementation plan. A little history on why we're talking about this trail project in the first place is that in 2016, the city and the Forest Preserve entered an intergovernmental agreement that identified the design, funding, implementation, and maintenance of this project as well as 2 other projects. Under the provisions of the IGA, the city has until January 5th, 2021 to vote on whether to allocate funding towards this project, the Warrenville Grove project. However, before this vote, a public information and input meeting needs to be held to solicit public feedback to inform the City Council on decisions regarding the project. Under the IGA, the Forest Preserve District will be responsible for maintenance of the trail if it is constructed, as like I said, because it is on Forest Preserve property. And it will also be responsible for $250,000 of the cost for construction and engineering. According to our estimates, this is about half of the total cost of construction and engineering for the project. It is important to note that this project was one of the projects that the city identified as that could be potentially funded by a portion of the park donations being collected by the various residential developments under construction in the city. Staff has also confirmed with the city attorney that this would be an eligible project. The park donations, the city council voted earlier this year to reserve the city open space and trail improvement projects. And this was one, as I previously mentioned, identified as one of the potential projects. So I guess why we are here today is, like I said, the first part of implementing or potentially implementing this project is to have a public information meeting. There are various residential residents that back up to the Forest Preserve property where this path would be constructed. So it is important to have their feedback, solicit information from them, as well as other community members regarding the feasibility of this project and any potential input and comments that the project or the people would have. So I guess at this time, staff is recommending that we go forward with the first step because the expiration date of the IGA is just around the corner. We suggest to have the City Council direct staff to conduct this public information and input meeting on the Warrenville Grove Trail Connection Project. Because of COVID guidelines, it would be along the similar guidelines as a City Council, City Committee of the Whole meeting. We would have it virtually and also ask if possible for the public to come into the City Council chambers. So it would follow similar guidelines to what we have been doing for all of our meetings. So I guess at this time, I'd like to take any questions.
Thank you for the background and all the information necessary for us. Mayor Brummel, do you have questions, comments?
Excuse me, no questions or comments, but I'm certainly in favor of the idea of having the public input meeting.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Bavir?
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
No questions now.
Alderman Goodman?
Yes, reviewing the intergovernmental agreement with the Forest Preserve, I noticed that there are 3 projects listed here and they all have a similar deadline, January of this coming year. Can you give us an update on those 3 projects? I know one of them we've heard about somewhat recently, the Mac Road project. But the deadline is running out on the Maple Hill project as well. Has staff anything to say on the updates on that? And is there any interest in maybe getting these deadlines extended so that we can have longer to work on all the projects?
Yes, so staff has been in communications with the Forest Preserve District exactly regarding what Councilwoman Goodman has just said. So I guess with the Maple Hill Fox Hollow path, that one is coming up as well. They all are coming up as an expiration. With that one, we intend to speak with the Forest Preserve first to see if they will extend the IGA agreement, or perhaps we might have to negotiate a new one with the Forest Preserve District. That one we have tried to obtain grant funding because under the IGA, the city would be fully responsible for the costs for that project, engineering and construction. And we're estimating, because there's actually a lot of wetland and floodplain, that could be about $1 million project plus. Because of the fiscal constraints and budget constraints right now, I think we're going to try and negotiate with the IG or with the Forest Preserve to extend that and bring that potential recommendation at a future City Council meeting. But as of right now, we are still talking with the Forest Preserve.
Okay, because just in terms of connecting Maple Hill to the rest of Warrenville, I can tell you that in the pandemic era, where everybody's sort of out walking around my neighborhood, I can report that there is a great demand in Maple Hill for pedestrian access. There are people on bicycles whom you see going around the neighborhood circle 100 times because we can't get anywhere from here. It's awful. I'm not just talking about the people out walking their dogs or the avid pedestrians who go out for exercise, but when you look at these bicyclists and how sad and frustrated they look trying to go loop up and down each curb and each cul-de-sac to try and just go a little bit further. As I'm walking around, there's this one guy, he'll lap me at least 5 times. But I think if we can extend that IGA with the Forest Preserve and try and apply for more grant funding in the future, that would be ideal. I know the city doesn't have the money to spend on a project like that right now, but we shouldn't let the opportunity to use Forest Preserve property for that project lapse. And since we have some funding from park donations, I wonder if any of that funding is available for a part of that cost.
Ron, I believe that, I don't know if that has been brought up to the attorney regarding the Maple Hill Fox Hollow Trail project.
No, we have not discussed that specific project with the attorney yet. We can certainly do that as, you know, we move forward and further assess the viability of that project based on the feedback we do and the timing of that project based on the feedback that we get from the Forest Preserve District. Ideally, it would be desirable to secure outside funding, grant funding for part of the project. We haven't been successful to date, but hopefully in the future there'll be, it's at least our understanding that there's going to be more money that's going to be put into the various grant programs that help fund trail improvements such as this as time goes on, and hopefully we'll be able to position the project more attractively in those grant application processes.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be interesting to hear the city attorney's opinion on those possible funding sources, because I think we can say that the interest on the city side is certainly still there at the big head of that project. The only other question I had to do with on the Mac Road multi-use trail. One of the other things that has the January deadline is securing cooperation from Winfield Township for the Mac Road thing. Do we have that cooperation secured?
Yes, they submitted a letter of, I guess, recommendation and approval with having the path on the north side of Mac Road. That was back in 2017 when that was first brought to City Council's, presented to City Council on the 3 various alternatives. And so we had letters both from Winfield Township and the Forest Preserve District on moving forward with that project and it being on the north side.
Okay, so for the Mac Road project, you're comfortable that we're going to meet the January deadline then?
Yes, we are actually going to be presenting at the next Committee of the Whole. I believe it's the Public Safety Committee of the Whole meeting for the next phase, the final engineering phase for that project. So we have already met, I guess, essentially the deadline because City Council has already approved, spending money at any point, for the engineering and final engineering for that project.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
And Alderman Wilson?
No comments.
Okay, that concludes the comment portion of this topic. Does anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a recommendation that the city council direct staff to conduct a public information and input meeting on a potential Warrenville Grove Trail Connection project.
Second, Alderman Goodman.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, would you take the vote tally, please?
Yes. Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Ashour?
Aye.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Wagner?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Menser. And we'll move on to consideration of policy to allow limited Ride DuPage program related travel outside of DuPage County for medical appointments only. And Assistant City Administrator Christina White will introduce this topic. Christina?
Thank you. We received a request from a resident who is using the Ride DuPage program to travel out, requesting to travel outside of DuPage for medical related appointments. When the program was first approved by the City Council, that was not an intent that was discussed or determined at that time to be included in the program. As you might recall, it's intended to be a Ride DuPage program, so it travels throughout DuPage County 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which was an expansion from our program at the time, which was the Acorn van. So staff is looking for some discussion and direction from the committee of the whole at this meeting to determine if a policy to allow for travel outside of DuPage for medical related appointments with some limitations is acceptable as part of the program. We did submit a survey out to some of the other plan sponsors and found of those that responded, which were not certainly all of them, but we got about 6 or so responses that they do allow outside travel outside of DuPage County with limitations. Generally, they have someone internally that is a program administrator that is reviewing each of those requests on a case-by-case basis and making a determination as to whether it's permitted as part of their program. Again, as you probably recall, the city does subsidize most of the cost associated with the Ride DuPage program. The details of the program are included in the backup with the program brochure, but generally the riders pay a flat fee of $2 per ride plus $1 per mile that's traveled, and that's one way. So they would pay each way would be a separate trip as it's determined by the program. Included in the backup is a draft policy with what staff would envision being some of the limitations if the committee wanted to allow travel outside of DuPage County. From a cost perspective, we have $45,000 budgeted this year for the Ride DuPage program. Last year, fiscal year 20 was $35,000. Of that 35, we spent approximately $2,800 in fiscal year 20. To date for fiscal year 21, we've paid about $1,100 for the program. Now that is only for May and June because their billing is a couple of months behind. So we're even going through the rest of the calendar year. Staff is projecting that it's likely will be under the $10,000 mark total for the program. And again, we have $45,000 budgeted. So while we don't know exactly what the cost impacts of allowing riders outside of DuPage County for medical appointments would be, because it depends on how many miles they're traveling and how often that occurs, I don't believe that it would exceed our current budget of the $45,000 if we allowed it. In speaking to some of the other plan sponsors that do allow it, it is not something that comes up regularly. It's a pretty manageable amount. They kind of estimated a couple a year, a few riders that needed to go outside of DuPage County for specialty appointments that they can't have met within the DuPage County parameters of the program. So again, that policy draft is included in the backup, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. Mayor Brummel?
Thank you. I have no objections to the change in the policy.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour?
Thanks for your efforts. I actually think it's probably a good thing. It's not going to be a big change, and certainly would offer some convenience.
Thank you. Alderman Barry.
Yes, I agree for medical purposes. This is a very good use of the Ride DuPage. But I do have a question under the policy. It says that the request for travel outside DuPage must be made at least 30 days in advance. And then it also says the rider agrees to follow the program requirements as outlined in Ride DuPage User's Guide, including scheduling the ride at least 24 hours in advance. So do they have to
Thank you.
register twice? Once
So
30
they
days in advance and then confirm 24 hours in advance?
There should be some additional wording to clarify that. So the intent there was for them to make the request to the city for approval of that, since it is on a case-by-case basis, at least 30 days in advance to allow us time to review their request and approve it. Scheduling the ride all occurs through the Ride DuPage program and through PACE, and that has to be at least 24 hours in advance. So I will make some clarifying language changes to that bullet point before next week's meeting.
Okay, so once they put the request in, say they have a regular appointment at Loyola Hospital or something, as an example, they only have to apply, make the request 30 days in advance, and then that goes on. They don't have to make the request every 30 days.
Correct. So if we were to approve the request and it is a repeat appointment, meaning they maybe have an appointment once every 3 months or 6 months over the course of a year, we could offer them an approval essentially in perpetuity, and then they would schedule those requests through PACE specifically at least 24 hours in advance of needing the ride. But the approval from the city could be for as long as we would like it to be. I will say probably initially, until we have some understanding of the cost, I probably would prefer to not approve a forever sort of an agreement of allowing it permanently. There would probably be some restrictions, and having them reapply maybe every 6 months or every year, just to make sure that we have a handle on the rides and that they are in fact for medical purposes and that they meet the criteria that the city has established.
Thank you. I do agree that that's a good idea at the beginning, especially the possible 6 months reapplication for them to be going outside DuPage County. I think that's a very good idea. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere.
Yeah, thanks for the report, and no questions at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos.
Yes, so I just need to clarify on the appointments currently in DuPage. When you call, they take you, and then they don't wait there while you have your appointment or your test. You call, you arrange, you call them, and they, as soon as they can, they send somebody.
You have to schedule both a trip to and from your destination. So if you need a ride from your home to a medical appointment or a hospital or any location, that is considered one trip, and a separate trip is then the ride from the location or destination back home.
Okay, so when you're done with your appointment, then you would call someone to come.
You would schedule both in advance. So if you know that you need a round trip appointment, you would schedule both of them in advance.
And what if you don't know the time? I guess I can talk to you about this privately. I don't know, but I'm just curious, because if somebody's going to go downtown or to Loyola, as Alderman Barry mentioned, you know, that's a distance, and so it might be hard to know. So anyway, it'll just be interesting we might as well try it, I guess. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
I know you mentioned being within the $45,000 budget. My understanding is that we don't really have any expectation that our current ridership levels are anywhere typical or reflection of how normal ridership might be. This is a very strange time. I expect people's comfort getting into taxis during a pandemic might be on the low side. So do we have any guess as to what the budget for this might be, or do you think that it could be substantial enough that we should put in some sort of cap?
At this point, I don't want to venture a guess because, as you pointed out, the last year has not been typical. The first year that we had the program, we were also running the Acorn van at the same time. So people were still using the Acorn van. Over the last few months since the Acorn van was retired, obviously we were dealing with a pandemic. We had a few months in, I want to say February through April, that ridership was very low. They were limiting the amount of rides. Pace had suspended the program for a short period of time because they were trying to adapt to new cleaning provisions and how to limit ridership so that they weren't putting any of the population at an unnecessary risk. So it is difficult to estimate based on those monthly totals that we've had over the last year and a half what the projected future costs might be, which is why I want to start small with this amendment to the program and have some control to limit what we're doing and what we're allowing and be able to evaluate what the cost implications of that might be long term before we sort of allow it in perpetuity.
Okay, and do we have any way of communicating to our elderly and disabled population what kind of COVID protocols this program has so that if they need this service right now during a difficult time, they know that it's available to them?
Yes, we can publish it on the city's Facebook page and city website. There is some information there now. I know PACE has issued information to the ridership about the protocols that they've instituted because of COVID, but we could also link to that information on our media pages.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say let's approve this change to the policy and then take a look at it again in the spring when we're looking at the budget, have a better idea of ridership and how much it's going to cost. But I don't think we would be anywhere close to that budgeted amount. So I think we're good.
Thank you. And Alderman Wilson?
Yeah, I think we should incorporate it now, but with the purpose to review it depending upon the outcomes of the future use.
Hey, thank you for all your comments. We do need a motion on this topic.
It's Alderman Goodman. I will make a motion that we recommend the City Council approve a policy authorizing use of Ride DuPage for travel outside of DuPage County on a limited basis for medical appointments only.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, would you please do the vote tally?
Sorry about that. Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Kerschel,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Ashour,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White. Next item is consideration of a policy to honor current and former City of Warrenville elected officials upon their passing. And Executive Assistant Deputy City Clerk Don Gravetti will fill us in on this topic.
Thank you. As you may be aware, in early 2019, discussions began regarding the creation of the city policy to recognize current and former city elected officials who may pass away. Alderman Goodman and Alderman Bevere and City Administrator Coakley have drafted a policy and procedures to recognize these city officials. Recognition consists of a press release, a memorial plaque, and a framed city flag for the family of the deceased mayor. The other items, the plaque would only be presented to all officials actually, but only the flag would be presented to deceased mayors. Staff is recommending City Council approve the policy to honor the current and former City of Warrenville elected officials upon their passing.
Thank you. And thank you to Alderman Goodman and Alderman Bevere and City Administrator Coakley for writing and putting this policy together. Mayor Brummel, you have questions or comments?
No questions, but it looks like a very good policy, and I'm appreciative of the efforts of the work group also. So thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour.
Thank everyone for their efforts.
Thank you. Alderman Berry.
Yes, this is a job well done. Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere.
No comment at this time.
Good. Thank you once again for your involvement. Alderman Davalos.
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody who volunteered to work on this. And other than that, I have no questions.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
I'll answer questions if anybody has any, but I'm happy with what the policy says.
And again, thank you for your involvement. Alderman Krischel.
No additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
No comment.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If someone feels so inclined, we could use a motion on this agenda item.
Alderman Davalos, recommend the City Council approve a policy to honor current and former City of Warrenville elected officials upon their passing.
Second by Alderman Goodman.
A motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, will you perform the vote tally, please?
Yes. Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Krischel,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Ashour,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos.
Aye.
Motion carries, and I hope I don't have to put this policy into place anytime soon.
Thank you. Me neither. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, consideration of a sign ordinance amendment to replace the term grandfathering. Community and Economic Development Director Menser will introduce this topic.
Recently, we received some information from Alderman Goodman that some courts around the country have questioned the use of the word grandfathering, and the courts were reluctant to enforce regulations that use that term because of the racist origins of the term, which stem back to just after the Civil War, and steps or requirements certain states were implementing to make it more difficult for African Americans to vote at that time. Alderman Goodman had a good suggestion that we review our codes to make sure to first identify where we might be using that term in our local codes, and then make the necessary changes to remove that term and put a more appropriate, technically correct term in its place. So we did do that review, and the only regulatory document that the city has that uses the term grandfathering is the sign ordinance. So we asked our city attorney to prepare an ordinance that would change the sign ordinance and replace the grandfathering term and reference with legal non-conforming. And she has done that. The draft ordinance was included in the agenda backup materials, and staff is recommending that the city council ultimately approve that ordinance so we can make that change sooner than later.
Thank you. I'll go to Mayor Brummel for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Good work.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour.
No comment.
Thank you. Alderman Berry.
No comment.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere.
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos.
Always good to learn something new. Thank you. No comment.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
My only comment is that we should pay attention to our word choice, especially in government and as public officials, and we're certainly smart enough to communicate better. So I'm glad staff made this change. There was one other place that the term arose in the city documents. So I guess my question is, will the employee personnel policy manual also be updated? I assume that doesn't need council approval.
Assistant City Administrator White.
Thank you. That change has been made in a change draft of the personnel manual, and when we bring it forward to the council to review and approve any updated changes to the personnel manual as a whole, that change will be included.
Thank you very much for taking the time to look through the city documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel.
No comment.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
No comment.
All right, thank you. If anyone cares to, we would also need a motion on this item.
Alderman Goodman, I'll make a motion to recommend the City Council approve an ordinance amending Section 8-14-8 of the Warrenville City Code regarding legal non-conforming signs.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk, would you care to take a vote tally, please?
Alderman Krischel,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Ashour.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Now we will go on to the reports for this evening. They're informational reports. If there's discussion, I will ask for discussion after each one. The first one is to review and file the retail vacancy report. Do we have any discussion or questions regarding that? Okay, seeing none. The next item is to review and file the Community Development Department fiscal year 2021 work plan update. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything they want to discuss regarding this report? Seeing none, our last report is to review and file the bi-monthly code enforcement activity report. Does anyone have any discussion on that report?
Alderman Davalos, when reading the last page, I saw quite a few, in fact, more than I thought, completed ordinance violations. And so I just sort of want to say thank you to the public for following the suggestions and completing the work that they needed to do on the violations. It was a lot more than I thought would be complete. So that's all.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of tonight's agenda items. There's one last thing that we need to do officially.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
That's fine.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk, will you please do the vote tally one more time?
Sure. Alderman Ashour,
Aye.
Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Krischel,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, this evening's meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone for your involvement and attendance, and stay healthy, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Good night, everyone.